Good morning, Grid Connections listeners. I'm joined today by Steve Goodman and Robert Wallace. I've got a pretty interesting story to talk with you about today and what they're kind of bringing as a perspective to EV drivers, specifically in rural areas. And I think this is a subject that's always been really close to me with my own personal experience in driving EVs throughout the Northwest here. And Steve and Robert, thank you so much for coming on today.
You
Yeah,
bet.
thanks for having us.
So, Steve, I know you've been in kind of the EV space for a little while. Can you give maybe a bit of a background on yourself, and then we'll kind of talk about what brings you onto the podcast today, and specifically just the greater thing that your team's trying to help people in this space learn about and really make EV driving more feasible and just easier for people in rural communities, and how big of an impact it's already having.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. I got started working in the EV space. It must have been about, I don't know exactly, six years ago. I worked at Fourth, a nonprofit in Portland that does transportation electrification work for about 3 years. While there, I actually worked with Robert on a program called eFarms that tries to bring electric equipment to agricultural producers. Uh, Later, after I left Fourth, I was hired by a very large company called NextEra. NextEra is a big wind and solar and battery stationary battery developer, and they started a transportation electrification division. Um, Worked there for a couple years, and they ended up getting out of that business. And when that happened, I decided to try to uh, parlay my fundraising experience into sort of a grant writing business. And my first client in that business was Robert. And we worked on a couple of grant applications together. We won a couple of grants, a couple of big grants, and it was actually during when we took a trip to Astoria to receive an award from the Rural Development Administration. I think it was, right, Robert? Is that right?
Yeah, it was USDA rural development.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, we went to Astoria to receive an award together, and during that trip, well, this it's a pretty interesting story that I'll let Robert tell, but we that became sort of the genesis of EV Math, which is a statewide marketing campaign that my business partner, uh, Mark Jacobs, along with Robert's nonprofit, Y East Resource Conservation and Development, we are spinning up this thing called EV Math. And it's really a statewide marketing campaign to normalize electric vehicles among rural Oregonians. We'll talk more about that. But Robert, why don't you tell the story of our trip to Astoria?
Yeah, everybody asked me, how I got involved with electric vehicles or what have you, and it initially started with the eFarms program that Steve had mentioned, and with that we had purchased one of the first Rivian pickup trucks that hit the market, and so that was kind of my very first experience. But that was part of the program. It wasn't necessarily a personal vehicle or anything. And in the meantime, I'm traveling all over the state driving a diesel pickup. And Steve, he kind of kept after me, and he'd call me on the phone as I'm driving down the road. And I remember one time I was going to my daughter's track meet, and I was 130 miles away or what have you. And he's like, "Well, how much does it cost you to drive that pickup?" And he kept kind of grilling me. We're over the phone going through these costs, and as this award event came up in Astoria, he's like, I live up near the Dalles, and he's out of the Portland area, and he's like, you meet me over on the east side of Portland, and I'm driving you down to Astoria in my Tesla, because I'd ridden in Tesla once and really hadn't experienced that. And so anyways, I met Steve. We hopped in his Tesla and proceeded to drive down to Astoria, received the award, and then drove back to Portland. And especially on the way back, on the way down, it was more talking about the features of the car. It's got some unique features and such. And on the way back, we kind of got talking about the numbers on it. I'm just thinking to myself, how many miles do I drive a year? And I'm driving a diesel pickup. Uh, what if I switched and keep the diesel pickup for hauling heavier loads and stuff? But what if I did switch and buy this car? Could I, does it make sense? And so that was kind of I was kind of hooked. I think at the time I really liked Steve's car, and it was a used Model 3 Tesla, and I actually went and bought the exact same car Steve has. I started looking online and what was available, and found a used Tesla Model 3. It was a 2018 at Platt Auto there in Portland, and I mentioned it to Steve, and Steve's like, "I'll go down there. I'll go down there and check it out for you." And he did. He did. And anyways, ended up pursuing that car and was able to get the federal tax credit on it on that used EV. And so to me, I bought a used EV basically for $21,000, and I just kind of at that time like I'm just gonna start driving this car anytime I'm doing a road trip that I don't need to take the pickup. And so that was that's my first personal EV that I've had experience with, and but have had other experience with some of the other vehicles and some of the work we do.
Yeah, kind of. I really appreciate the context and kind of the background for all of that. So, uh, I guess one, can we take a step back and go speaking of just like, I think there's a lot of great things we kind of talked about here, but you mentioned kind of like the electric farm equipment that I believe you're kind of doing with Fourth and that program. And I know that's not directly related to EV math, but I think probably for a lot of our listeners, this might be kind of surprising that, I mean, electrification is really going into a lot of different fields. It's not just kind of for people's to replace people's second car or something. I mean, it's obviously becoming a more common form of transportation, and then there's also kind of actual practicality on the industrial side. Could you share a little bit of how that program kind of worked around, like, what were some of your takeaways as far as the feasibility of kind of electrifying more of your day-to-day uh,
Well,
equipment?
I'll kick it off. So when I applied for the job at Fourth, I actually pitched the executive director, a guy named Jeff Allen, on the idea of looking into a company out of California. It's called Solectrac, that was making, basically hand building electric tractors, to see if we might do some sort of a try before you buy program to get agricultural producers, in Oregon to try an electric tractor. Now, these are not big combines or anything like that. They're tiny little, um, what do you call them? Utility tractors. So I think they're like 50 horse equivalent or something like that, right, Robert? Anyway, we ended up getting a grant, and we needed somebody who wasn't, from the city like me, to go out into rural communities and actually like show people these tractors. And a mutual friend of ours introduced Robert and me, and he ended up being sort of the tip of the spear in terms of taking this newfangled equipment out to rural producers, because he's got more credibility than anybody from Portland does in terms of talking to people out in rural Oregon. So yeah, he started doing that. And Robert, why don't you talk about what's happened to the program since, because and what it's called and where to find information about it too.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I have to admit, my apologies for going down this rabbit hole a little bit, but I'm actually in the market for a new tractor. So it is coming from a purely selfish standpoint too. So I'm really curious to hear more and how this worked out for you, Robert.
yeah. I remember when Steve called me, and I was, I knew who Fourth was, the organization he was working for, but I didn't necessarily know a lot about him. And he wanted to know if I'd be interested in working with them to test this electric tractor out that they were looking at. And I kind of, it caught me off. I didn't even know there was electric tractors on the market. I obviously heard about the electric vehicles, on road cars and such. And I had to think about it, and I never gave him an answer that day. I said, I need to think about this, because I mean, I kind of thought, my reputation's on the line if I'm, testing out this darn electric tractor. What does that mean, for some of the work we're doing? But long story short, we ended up pursuing with that, and that the program was originally called eTractor, and now it's called eFarms, and it's actually a coordination of 4 different nonprofits. And so, Fourth, out of Portland, Sustainable Northwest is another Portland-based nonprofit, Bonneville Environmental Foundation, and then Y East RC&D. And so we've joined together and are exploring this program. And essentially, we've got a mixture of electric vehicles. We've had the Rivian pickup truck. We've got the Ford F-150 Lightning pickup truck. We've got a few of the Monarch electric tractors. We originally started with these Select Track tractors, and Select Track has since went out of business. We've got some of the Polaris UTVs or Polaris side-by-sides that are fully electric. We've got one of the, it's a JCB mini excavator that's electric. And so we got kind of a variety of different equipment. To date, most of the focus has really been in Oregon. Kind of starting 2025, we've been exploring more in Washington State. And a lot of that just because of the funding that had been derived from that. And so essentially what we do is we look and see what's on the market, what we think may be useful in rural areas as equipment-wise or vehicle-wise, purchase that through grant funding, bring it into our program. I live on a small farm south of the Dalles out in Dufert, Oregon. And so I'll actually bring it to my farm. We field test it. We, tractors, we put a mower on it, a rototiller, what have you, and we actually go use it on the farm operation here. And we'll kind of do the initial testing on it. We'll put data collection on it. And then once it's ready, we actually loan these pieces of equipment out to small farms in Oregon that have an interest in testing the equipment, whether that's the pickup truck or the Polaris or the tractors or what have you. And I think initially we thought, boy, is there an appetite for rural folks that actually want to, test this stuff out? And we've been overwhelmed by people that are interested in testing these vehicles out. Because, it just, up until a few years ago, you didn't see very many electric vehicles outside of, the Portland area. I just remember usually for us driving from the Dalles into Portland, we hit about Troutdale, Gresham, and you start seeing some Teslas and stuff, and you just didn't see that, around much in the rural areas and stuff. And so, long story short, the eFarm program is up and going. Again, it's it's a collaboration of 4, Portland, Oregon-based nonprofits, and it's been quite successful and stuff. And so we, it's been a really fun program to work in.
That's great to hear. And I guess, yeah, now that you're saying you can borrow these, if someone will drive it over the Hood River Bridge, I might take you up on that. But so I guess, I think electromotors, torque, there's a lot of reasons why it makes sense, especially compared to like the average little Kubota you'd be replacing it with. And it's funny you bring this up because I was just at the kind of EV charging summit in Vegas back in March, and John Deere and a lot of these other kind of larger commercial players are now really starting to make a move into electrification as well. But I guess I'm for those who are listening, can you just share like some of the things that kind of stood out to you when you were making that first decision about like, okay, uh, why is this Monarch or this electric that much better than just the average Kubota, or what's been your experience with that kind of switch from the traditional diesel
Yeah.
tractor over to an electric one?
Yeah, and I'll start off by saying, Kubota, John Deere, New Holland, Case. They've got over 100 years of engineering in that equipment, and it's a tough, tough level of engineering to meet and stuff. And so, I think as we're testing the equipment out, we're trying to. It's tough to compare against a John Deere or Kubota
Yeah.
because you've got a very very high standard there. And so, but there's some things with the electric equipment that I think's beneficial. It's a little bit different, and some of that is, not only the operation of the equipment, you have a lot of torque with the electric equipment and such, but it's basically a mobile power plant on wheels. And so, like on my place, I mean, right as we speak, I've got one of the Monarch tractors that's running a little irrigation pump for me in an area where I have no power, but I can charge the tractor, take it up there, and it's got outboard power, 110 and 220 volt outlets, and so I can run a little irrigation pump off it. And
That's cool.
so there's some different things that are an advantage with the electric that you don't traditionally see on a diesel tractor and stuff. And so I think, the one of the factors that a lot of the manufacturers had mentioned to us originally was the noise, and I didn't really appreciate it until we had a chance to operate the electric. And so it's, we're looking at it a lot of times on a cost basis. You compare an electric to diesel, the cost of the electric equipment tends to be higher, and I think that's a real challenge to try to figure out how to navigate that. But the noise aspect, and I've had a number of folks after they run the electric, they're like, I've never been able to talk while I'm planting grapes or,
Right.
harvesting or doing these different whatever tasks they are when there's multiple people in the field around the tractor, because the tractor traditionally makes so much noise. And so we, kind of focus originally on the cost, the operation of the electric equipment and such. And then, we're thinking about, well, hey, if you had a greenhouse operation and you had electric versus diesel, just the emissions inside that enclosed area, could be impactful, and those types of things. And with the Monarch, one of the features to it that we aren't necessarily involved with, but it's actually got capabilities of being an autonomous tractor. And so
Hmm.
we had Monarch come in 2024 for the cherry pre-harvest tour that Oregon State University Extension and Washington State University Extension had hosted in Dallasport in the Dalles, and we actually set that tractor up to run it in a fully autonomous mode. And so the cherry growers, there's probably 150 cherry orchardists around, and researchers and such, and basically the tractor starts up, starts down the row, mows down the row, turns around, comes back mowing, and everybody just looked, I couldn't believe that. And so our eFarms program is really looking at the electric drivetrain, but there are other pieces to these, newer pieces of equipment and such that, not to say you can't have an autonomous diesel tractor either, but that was one of the features with the Monarch specifically that they've tried to promote in our marketing and stuff.
No, that's interesting. I mean, I can see how that plays kind of further into like the cost of maybe a higher upfront cost ownership, but then the cost operation and other kind of
Mm-hmm.
benefits, and the
Mm-hmm.
autonomy with the labor aspect of it's pretty impactful. But we'll transition back over to what we're here to talk about today, and I think that cost of operation um, is probably pretty significant, and kind of it sounds like what's a big part of the reason you initially were kind of interested in going in electric for your personal vehicle instead of driving the diesel truck all around. But I mean, was that the majority of your interest in going electric car was at first was that kind of like delta in cost, or were there other kind of aspects of it that kind of drew you to having an electric car, uh, kind of more for driving around instead of just the diesel truck?
Yeah, for me, it was honestly a cost factor. And I mean, I'll drive typically, 45,000 miles a year sometimes. Just depends on, uh, and that's kind of combined, and that's, for work or for going to the kids' high school basketball games or football or volleyball games and all that and such. And so for me, just looking at the number of miles I drove and what it was costing me to do that, and so that was the big factor for me. I think, when I was looking, and Steve tried to talk to me, and he's like, get something a little newer. And I was like, I don't know. I just not sure if this is going to work for me. And I kind of wanted to limit my expense or, getting in. And when I found that used Tesla Model 3. And then you hear, about the batteries and, certain life left. And so this particular car still had some warranty left on the batteries. And, so it kind of gave me this comfort level. And I think the other piece for me was the federal tax credit. It knocked
Mm.
$4,000 off basically the hood at the dealership for that car. And so it was originally priced at 24,950, and I got out the door, 21,000 bucks basically for this used car. And I remember when I first got back to town with it, one of my buddy farmer guys, he's like, "Oh, it's pretty nice driving a $60,000 car." And I'm like, "Dude, it's a $20,000 car," and he couldn't believe it, and stuff. So for me, it was just as economics, I mean.
Hey, Robert, um, talk a little bit about the comparison of what it costs you to drive a pickup truck 4,000 miles a month versus
Yeah.
the EV.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of some general factors, and I mean, we've part of this program we're working on, this EV math. We've actually created a calculator so folks could go in and kind of put their numbers in to see. And the thing that was in the back of my mind was with us living, right on the Columbia River, um, and one of the cooperative customers, and in town it's the PUD. We have some of the least expensive
Yeah.
electrical energy rates around, but yet if you go to the diesel pump or the fuel pump, it seems like we may be the highest, in the higher category in the region, anyways, on the price of liquid fuels. And so that kind of always stuck in the back of my mind, and I always kind of thought, boy, why aren't we looking at this, kind of out in these areas that have, a low cost electrical price? It seems like we have an advantage there. And so, I mean, driving the car, it's, we're talking two different vehicles. We're talking a 4x4 diesel truck versus a 4-door sedan car, but it costs me 2 to 3 cents a mile to drive that Tesla car versus 17, 20 plus cents a mile to drive that diesel pickup. And then the other factor is, I don't know if you've looked at the price of diesel pickups lately, but they're quite expensive. And a lot of times I was driving, from the Dalles to Portland or to Salem or to Pendleton or Tri-Cities to have a meeting. I didn't necessarily need to drive a four-wheel drive diesel pickup to go get me where I needed to go. And so for years and years, I've always driven a pickup. And so it was quite a change for me to drive a car, sitting down low and stuff. And I've gotten used to it now, but boy, it was quite a factor there at first. But I mean, I'm driving this car for probably a fifth or a sixth or an eighth of what it cost me to drive that diesel pickup. And so, and I guess the other factor is, for me anyways, was the charging infrastructure, because I can charge at home real easy. It wasn't a problem with that. On the farm I live on, I've got several 220 outlets that they originally put in for like welding outlets and such.
Right. Right.
And so, I mean, I've got a number of locations at my property where I can charge. It's not an issue whatsoever. But I was more concerned, if I need to go to Pendleton and back, do I have enough range, and where would I charge? And same with going to Salem and back and stuff. And the one thing I found quickly with the Tesla car is the charging infrastructure is there. And so, I mean, you kind of find your spots where you like to charge, and I haven't had any issues with that. The only, there's been a couple of locations where the kids have had a basketball game, out like by Spray or out in the, a pretty remote area, and I can get there. I just don't know if I can get home. And so, usually that's in the middle of winter, so I might take the diesel pickup for that. But and all other times, just driving this car for the most part. And I almost think I'm trying to overwork the car sometimes. I I'm frequently, part of my job or whatever, I'll do pump evaluations or be working on a piece of equipment or something. And so I've always got the car loaded with tools or equipment or that type of thing. Here last week we took it down into Bend in Central Oregon, And of course, you got to stop at Costco and get a couple of big bags of dog food and all the goods in there and stuff. And so, I mean, I definitely put the car to work. And I mean, that's just kind of what you do when you live out in the country. I mean, I live, essentially out in the middle of the wheat field. My closest neighbor's over a mile away. And so when you go to town, you got to get supplies, I guess, and stuff. So uh, I don't give it light use, and I drive it on a daily basis and stuff. But again, the cost factor for me and just what it costs to drive the car is the main reason I pursued it.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I mean, I'm not hitting 45,000 miles a year, but usually I'm doing about 25 to 30,000 easily.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because for me, there was a financial incentive of kind of getting rid of gas. Uh, but I think the thing that really stood out to me was oil changes.
Oh,
I've changed my own oil in the past, but especially when I was living either in Bend or even kind of closer to Portland area, I would usually just go to the one that like Jiffy Lube things. And the cost of that, but also the time trade-off is like, okay, that takes, I mean, I was doing them every couple of weeks, and I'm sure it's probably the
yeah.
same, if not more for you. And that becomes such like a time savings and just like one less kind of that maintenance and cost of trying to run it. I mean, you're saying you do about 45,000 miles a year. Are you seeing now like two-thirds of that are in the EV, or do you know roughly kind of how
Mhm.
much of that you've moved away from the truck?
Yeah, I would say probably 85% of my
Oh, wow.
driving's in the car. I mean, and and then I still use the truck a fair amount, um, but usually I'm only using the truck when I need to tow a trailer, I need to
Yeah.
haul heavy. Yeah, otherwise it's so easy to drive the car. I mean, it just especially I don't know how many times I go to downtown Portland and try to park a pickup truck. I
Yeah.
mean, that's even if it's a half ton, like F-150 or something, it's tough. And now you can just wheel in there with the car and it makes it a lot easier. So there's some, kind of hidden things, and it's a different type of vehicle. But I would still say, majority of the time, I'll choose to drive the car. It's really great for my mom lives in the Dalles, and so just to jet in and see her and check on her and see what she's up to. It's just super easy to hop in that car and go in and come back and stuff. And you'd mentioned the oil changes. Well, the oil change for a diesel pickup is usually $300 to $400. Kind of depends on what all you need done.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's a huge savings just that alone. I I don't know. I kind of like the fact too. I mean, with us, on the Columbia River here, I can look and see the hydro dam and know that, hey, my power is made right there. So when I talk about local sourced energy and stuff and everything, but yeah.
No, that I mean that's a good point too. I'm trying to add solar. We're kind of redoing our house, and so solar is definitely a big one. But you're right. Like if you're coming from an environmental standpoint, here in the gorge, it's like okay, it's either hydro or wind. You can't really
Mhm.
feel that bad about it. And for me personally, it's just I'm a big enough for nerd to want to do it and have kind of that self-reliance or any issue because of a grid problem. But no, I think that's really great to hear. And Steve, was there something you wanted to jump in and say there?
Well, I just wanted to point out, and we won't go into a lot of detail, but Robert's story is really compelling. But on the evmath.org site, there are 9 other stories of 9 other rural Oregon households. And some of the stories are just amazing. One in particular I love, and that's the story of a woman named Brandy McNamee. She married a fifth generation rancher in Antelope, and took her 3 years to convince him that they should trade in their Ford, I think it's a Expedition or something, um, for an electric vehicle. And her husband's a trained diesel mechanic, but she eventually wore him down. And now, they actually ended up leasing a Tesla Model Y, and they use it to take their own 3 kids and a neighboring family's 3 kids to the bus stop and back, because the bus stop is like, I don't know, like 20 miles away or something. Anyway, and she does that every day. And, but it's gotten to the point where her husband loves the car as much as she does. And he drives it around the ranch during the day. So, I mean, this is a fifth generation ranching family, and they are saving more on fuel every month than the lease is costing them. And I think Robert's in the same boat, right? I mean, I think you've said you financed your vehicle, and the fuel savings are more than the cost of the monthly payment. And we're seeing this, with rural households around all around Oregon, that the fuel savings in some cases outweighs the cost of the vehicle itself. So they're literally like making money by having another vehicle instead of just driving around the big old Ford Expedition or diesel pickup truck that they used to be driving for everything. And the other part of this that Robert sort of mentioned with the hydropower, I mean, it's almost like an economic development strategy for rural areas, right? Instead of all that money for fuel going out of the community, the money to charge these vehicles really stays in the community at the local utility. And I think that's super important. And obviously, it leaves a lot of money in people's pockets as well that they can spend on other things other than fueling their vehicle. So I don't know. I just encourage folks, if you're interested, to check out the site, read some of these stories, watch a couple of the videos. They're really inspiring.
And I think it's kind of interesting what you mentioned, Robert, that I don't think most people fully appreciate about the cost of gas and diesel in more rural areas. And they don't take into account the fact that it is a lot more expensive, usually
Hmm.
because of the additional transportation cost. And so many of the times, yeah, there are PUDs out here. And I'm always consistently surprised by how cheap electricity is in the Northwest in general. I know it's going up, but we still pay so much less than so many other parts of the country, even if you're on PG or Pacific Power. And then you get onto a PUD and it'll be like a third of that even. And so I think that is a really interesting part of kind of like the whole EV math kind of concept. Because I mean, the gas car I had replaced our EV with a few years ago, speaking of what Steve's talking about, pretty much was that same deal. I was getting about almost 30 miles to the gallon in that thing, but I was driving so much, and even just buying regular gas, um, it was pretty much breaking even. Especially once I figured in oil changes, I had a much nicer car, and I was paying less. One of the other things you also mentioned there, Robert, that I think is really fascinating is the utility of an electric vehicle. Um, I had this first experience, and this was kind of a wild one back in 20. I've been impressed with a lot of electric vehicles because of the storage in them. But I think this was back in 2015, 2016. There was a startup I was working for in the Bay, and the company car we had, because we were doing some kind of R&D on it, was the Model S. And we had to go to Home Depot to buy a bunch of materials for our to set up this office garage space we had. It was a couple 1,000-foot garage, and I went in and we had to go buy some. We had to buy both, I think, three doors and I want to say four wood sawhorses, and we got all of those after we fold down the seats in this Model S. And we fold down the seats. We got the three doors, four sawhorses, and I forgot whatever else we had bought at Home Depot all into this one car, even without like having to put anything on the rack. And obviously, the Model S is like a bigger car, but I'm consistently surprised by like just the inherent utility, and I think that's what most people don't realize. I mean, I think growing up in a more rural area, it's like you see, I mean, the Northwest is a little bit different, but it's pretty common to see either a big diesel truck, F-350 or something, and then like a Subaru Outback.
Hmm.
And as for as much crap as a Subaru gets, a Subaru Outback's an incredible utilitarian car. And so there's kind of a reason you just see these things out there every now and then. And I think just with kind of the layout of like a Model 3 or some others where you have the front, you have all these just spaces, whether it's you're going to, I mean, this even happened to me the other day. We forgot to get dog food. And yeah, I had to get a couple 50-pound bags and I just threw in the back. Not even an issue at all. And ran some other errands, didn't even think about it. And then went and got a bunch of uh, had to get some ground cover of some clover, and I threw that in the back, and I didn't even think about it. And then my neighbor sees me taking all this stuff out of the car, and they're like, "What? Where did you go?" I was like, "Oh, I went here, went there." And then he's got I mean, admittedly, you could obviously fit. I forget what Dodge. I think he's got a 2,500, and he just couldn't believe all the stuff I had just. And I didn't even like. I was even trying to prioritize where I put this. I just knew it'd fit in there, and I think there's just a lot of utilitarian advantages to like an electric vehicle platform for more rural areas that that I think there's two elements. Like in some ways, it's I think someone growing up in a more rural area, they're surprised an electric vehicle can be so utilitarian. But I think someone probably growing up in a more urbanized area don't realize or appreciate how important that having a utilitarian vehicle is when you're
Mhm.
in a more rural area. And I think that's just what's always consistently impressed me with like an electric vehicle platform is just how much stuff you can get in one, and you can do other kind of trips that normally you wouldn't be able to do in like a sedan or a small crossover even.
Yeah, and I even forget that, that we have the frunk, and put items in there and until I've exceeded the capacity of what I can fit with the seats folded down on the rear end of the car and stuff. But yeah, one other thing I was going to mention too that kind of came to mind was I don't know how many times previously I would need to go someplace early in the morning and I hadn't fueled up and I'd have to wait till the local fuel station opened before I could leave, so I'm down there at 8 o'clock waiting. I really should have left at 7 or 6:30 because I, was busy the day before and forgot to get fuel. And that's the one thing too, this charge from home. I mean, I can, get up in the morning and take off and I've got my full tank of fuel all ready to go and stuff. And it takes a little bit of getting used to because, it seems like traditionally, whether it's a tractor or a pickup, it's like you get ready to go someplace, you fuel before you leave, so you leave with the full tank. But that's the fueling stations, unless you have fuel on farm or on site, are somewhat limited in the rural areas. And up until just recently, our local fuel station just got a 24-hour card lock type thing. But traditionally, you could get fuel from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And I don't know how many times I've got up in the morning and left at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the morning, thinking, man, I'm so glad I can leave on a full tank, and I didn't have to stress about making sure I got fuel the night before and everything. And that's just from the ability to charge at home. And so just a little bit of different, different setup as a result and stuff. And so I think if you can charge at home, it's even that much more of an advantage. It feels to me, and I hope that some of the technology they're working on here in the soon to come, with the vehicle to grid and the bidirectional charging, because we've looked at that a lot on how we can use the vehicles to provide backup power for our homes. And especially when we look at the pickup trucks where they got the larger battery capacity. I mean, just that factor alone to have a portable power plant that I can plug in and run, if it's my booster pump for my house and my
Yeah.
internet, a refrigerator, even limited things. But I look forward to those days, and the technologies, I think it's there. It's just a matter of, I think it's evolving a little bit, but just another big advantage in my mind. Because like at my house, if I don't have any power, I don't have any cell phone coverage, so I have no communication, I have no internet, I have no water, I have no, you know, no refrigeration or anything else. And so it's kind of a big deal, especially in fire season for us to try to make sure you've got some services because a lot of times you're on your own if there is a fire event or what have you and stuff. And so just kind of wanted to mention a few of those other factors I guess I've thought about and considered that are, beyond the economics, I think, of these vehicles.
You know,
Yeah, I think. Oh, what were you gonna say there, Steve?
I was just going to pile on to that. Another factor for the McNamees, this ranching family out of Antelope, the closest fuel for them is 40 miles away. The closest fuel pump, right? And now Brandy gets up every morning and she's got a full battery with close to 300 miles of range and doesn't have to worry about driving 40 miles to go get a full tank of gas, or and they probably, I don't know about there. A lot of ranches have fuel tanks, on site, but they don't. If that fuel tank is empty, they don't have to go 40 miles into town to get a tank of gas. So
Yeah, that was actually going to be one of the things I mentioned too, because I drive down to Bend now probably every other week from here in the gorge, and I usually go right past Robert, going right through Dufur and Maupin. And there's some pretty good stretches that when I've driven in our gas car, that if you're not really thinking ahead, yeah, you can kind of run into an issue, or you kind of have to really hypermile it to get to the next gas station. There's been a couple times I've rolled into Madras, which is a pretty much kind of, I wouldn't say in the middle, but it's kind of in the middle of, uh, or I'm sorry, Maupin, kind of in between Madras and getting over to the Dells or Doofer, where there's kind of like a last gas station for a while. And there's been a couple times exactly that. I'm rolling in at like 10 or midnight. It's either closed or they're out of gas or other issues like that. And now I just drive straight from here to Bend without even thinking about a charge once I get down in Bend, right at the place I'm staying at. And that to me just unlocks so much. I mean, that story exactly you're talking about, Steve, is like there's so many places, especially like I think as someone who lived in Portland for a decade, there's definitely a lot of I-5 mentality. And as someone who's kind of like grown up east of that, you get out to like Prineville, or there's a lot of places just in other parts of the state where, yeah, it could be easily 40 miles or more to the closest gas station, or depending on the time of year, especially if you get propane or gas, you get a bad storm or something, it might delay it another week or two before you can get that. So I think there's a lot of really cool use cases that electrification unlocks. And I think, yeah, speaking of that vehicle to grid thing, I mean, that's been a really big thing I've been interested in too. I would love to see more of the smaller vehicles unlock it, but especially when you get to like those larger battery pack sizes and you're in the 100 kilowatt hour plus range, maybe not vehicle to grid, but at least vehicle to home kind of setups. And some of the trucks that at least have the power outlets right there that you can leverage is such a big game changer. I'm kind of curious, Robert, on your experience. I think we can talk about the vehicle to home as well, but you obviously now drive kind of the daily the Tesla Model 3, but you've used the Rivian and you've kind of been exposed to Ford F-150 Lightning. Um, for your needs, do you still kind of prefer having kind of like the Model 3, and then maybe there's like the S or the truck has some advantages here and there for the farm life, or like kind of what style of EV right now fits the best into your life in your experience, do you think?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I think probably my best suited would probably be one of the pickup trucks, to be honest with you. And because even though I say I use the diesel pickup to haul, I'm using the car a lot to haul
Yeah, yeah.
everything from livestock feed to dog food to, I mean, to tools and stuff. And so I probably should be looking at either the F-150 or the Chevy Silverado EV probably would be the ideal. Um, but I think the cost factor, getting into the Tesla Model 3 used for the $20,000 mark, is obviously a third of the price of getting into one of the pickups and stuff. And so for me, I needed to dip my toe in the water and test it out, see if it was going to work for me first. And But I think you know it would be nice to have four-wheel drive. My car is just a rear wheel drive. And so there's some factors about that. Kind of that country living where we all would like four-wheel drive, and we'd all like kind of a little higher profile vehicle, or higher lifted vehicle just for some of
Yeah.
the stuff we have to drive on and those types of things. And even something as simple as the tires, I mean, we're driving a lot of gravel roads and stuff. And I know Brandy that Steve has mentioned out in Antelope, she actually went and got some heavier duty tires for her Tesla. And I've had a couple of flats with the Tesla, and I'm driving it in places that the typical Tesla owner probably isn't going to dare to go, you might say. And not that I'm abusing the car, just more of the gravel road type things that are harder on the tires and such. It's more that country road, rougher roads and such. So.
Well, and that's kind of interesting. I mean, I get kind of what you're saying, and there is an interesting trade-off with the electric pickups, is just how damn heavy they are.
Hmm.
Um, and so like there's been a couple I've looked at, and I even know of a couple local small bridges that have like a 8,000 pound limit, which traditionally wouldn't have been really much of an issue, but you start getting to those like the Chevy Silverado or something, you're
Yeah.
like 1,500 over. Um, I kind of agree with you because yeah, I've taken both our 3 and our Y. I didn't think ever any place that crazy, but then people like, you took it where? And
Hmm.
it's just like, yeah, that's kind of where we have to go. I mean, we do we still have one gas vehicle, and that's kind of our like actual off-road adventure vehicle. It's an old Land Rover Defender.
Hmm.
But yeah, for the most part, uh, I think 80 to 90% of the time you can probably get. It's surprising how far you can get away with like a crossover electric vehicle.
Hmm. Yeah, and I guess to talk about the range piece a little bit. I mean, I think uh, the very we like I mentioned, we first my first real driving of electric vehicle was the Rivian, and then the F-150 Lightning, and then the Tesla. Um, and it is a factor, the range anxiety, because you're always worried about how far can I go and where am I going to charge, and I think I do always carry a portable charger with me, and so and that's one thing we found too is oftentimes, folks, it's like the charging aspect of these vehicles. It seems like it's made to be more complex than it really needs to be. I guess if you're talking more level two type charging, where if you had a
Yeah.
two outlet, and I just remember one time, me and one of my coworkers took the Rivian pickup truck out to Christmas Valley,
Oh
and
yeah.
we went to a hay growers meeting out there. We do a lot of work in the agriculture space around energy projects and stuff. And the hay growers out there were kind of chuckling at us, and they said, "Well, how are you guys getting home?" And "Well, we're going to drive home." And we had no issues getting out there and back with the vehicles. But I mean, we kind of go prepared too. And I always figured if I needed, I could. We know a lot of the farmers and ranchers across the state, so we could call one of them and ask if we could plug in their shop for a little bit. They wouldn't let us live it down, but we're not going to get stranded either, type of thing. So yeah, but I think range anxiety is real, and I remember talking to Steve initially, and his experiences, because it seemed like he drove his car, wherever he wanted to go, and the technology in the vehicles helps with that. You got to build some trust with it too,
Yeah.
and stuff. And I think I'm at the level now. I've had this Tesla for about a year, and I'm at the level where I've got pretty good trust with it that I know I'm going to get where I want to go. I know where the different stations are that I want to use, and stuff. But it definitely takes some trust because there isn't necessarily a charging station on every corner or every small town, like a fuel station would be, or, to get, walking down the road with the gas jug, it's kind of a little bit more challenging to do with an electric car to if you get stranded or what have you. So.
Oh, for sure. And I think that kind of plays to when I was talking about the I-5 mentality. Because I mean, just until maybe, I guess maybe it's been a little more than 2 years ago before they put that supercharger in Madras in. But
Hmm.
really before that, and other than that one, there really hasn't been much off 97 or many of these other kind of rural highways or 197 even. And it was something I wanted to ask you, I guess, kind of playing around that, because I think that's actually one of the speaking of range, that's one of the underappreciated things when someone's going in to buy like their first electric vehicle is like efficiency of a vehicle. I love a lot of the big EV trucks, and I just like trucks in general. But like the Model 3 and Model Y, especially the Model 3, that thing can just keep driving and driving, and it's like so much more efficient because I mean, obviously it's a smaller a car unto itself, but I've just found like that you kind of you see, yeah, it's got like 400 miles of range or something on some of these trucks, and then like you actually start driving it, and it's like, well, in this situation, yes, it's 400 miles, but in reality, it's this. And I've just found like there is kind of a underutilized or underappreciated like value in a really efficient small vehicle, that I think that's kind of why the Model 3 is such a good kind of all around almost pocket knife kind of vehicle, or like Swiss Army knife kind of vehicle. But I'm kind of curious in your experience, because something I've been noticing when I'm doing a lot of these big drives into more rural areas is, I'm sure like a DC fast charger or a fast charger along the way wouldn't say no to it by any means. But I found a lot of the time I wouldn't even have to stop at a DC fast charger if the place I was going to just had a level two charger. It
Hmm.
probably would have been enough to just have my meeting and then either top off or whatever. I could easily make it the 100, 200 miles back without ever even having to stop at a charger. And I think that is something where there's so many headlines about DC fast chargers, and obviously they're great to have. But especially when you start getting these more rural areas, you're usually out of the car for so long. And and once again, that's kind of the advantage of a smaller car is it has such a bigger impact on how far it can go versus sometimes the truck of like plug into a level two charger. I'm just kind of curious with your experience. Have you noticed that as well, or are you do you see DC fast chargers all along 97 and Eastern Oregon in general?
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that. I think uh, kind of you hear everybody wants a DC fast charger, but in reality, we can do a lot of the charging with level two,
Yeah.
and in a lot of cases, the power's available to enable this to do that. And um, I think looking for like the destination chargers, those types of things, and just a couple of examples I'm thinking of is I remember I had some meetings going on in Bend, and I had to drive from Dufur down to Bend, and uh, my daughter had a home basketball game, and so I couldn't leave here till late. It was in like February, this most recent February. And I remember I got down to the hotel in Bend, and I really never looked to see what charging. I just knew around Bend there'd be some charging, so I wasn't too worried about it. And I got down there late, and most of the parking lot was full, and there was only a couple empty spots. And two of the spots were actually Tesla destination chargers. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. And I just backed in and I just plugged in, and I was, there for a day and a half at a conference. And I mean, obviously the next morning my car was fully charged, but, definitely, like the pickups and stuff, you're getting about somewhere around 2 miles per kilowatt hour. And then the Model 3, I'm getting closer to 4. So
Yeah.
almost double the distance with the same amount of energy. And so I think, again, that as you're driving these longer distances, if you don't need that heavier duty pickup or vehicle, it definitely, you can, essentially in that case, if a pickup takes 2 miles per kilowatt hour and this car's taking, getting 4, you're getting twice the mileage and stuff. The other thing I was kind of chuckling about the other day, I was thinking about is quite a few of the local people, at least in our area, that drive quite a ways from work. Traditionally, several of our local guys would do is they'd go out and try to find like a used Volkswagen TDI, turbo diesel, getting 40 miles a gallon, and then drive that, and just thinking about, well, this is the new TDI mileage vehicle, for those folks that are driving, 80 miles round trip or 100 miles round trip for work type of thing, and but yet you can fuel it at home. So just um, some of the higher mileage cars have been around. I guess full
Yeah.
mileage cars have been around in these rural areas and stuff for years. This is just kind of a next generation of that.
No, I think that's really funny you mentioned that because I've definitely known people who do that as well. Or it's like the old, like for I mean, when I was growing up, the thing was like the old Metro Geos, just like the
Oh yeah,
ugliest pieces of junk, but they would just keep going forever, and they barely used any gas. And I mean, not only that, it is also just really interesting to see like uh, in the last few years, you're talking kind of like that 4 miles to kilowatt hour. I've been driving one of the new Model 3s, and even the all-wheel drive one, going from like here to Bend, it gets close to 5. Like it's just
oh really?
crazy at how quickly that is. It's still, I mean, yeah, MPGs are kind of progressing in like the traditional fueling combustion engine space, but it's also wild to see that how quickly there is still advances being made. I think you and I, Robert, given how many miles we drive, leasing usually isn't a great option. But I
Yeah.
think for like people who don't hit like keep it under 15,000 miles a year, that's where like a leasing thing actually does kind of make a lot of sense for people because some of these lease deals right now are just so cheap.
Hmm.
And you can get like that kind of crazy efficiency out of them, especially if you're in a place where there's easy level two charging, you can charge at home. It really does become kind of a no-brainer option.
Yeah, and I think that's several of the folks that Steve and I have talked to that had pursued the lease options, and because the rate for the lease was it was kind of surprisingly uh, inexpensive. and
Yeah,
they blend. The lease package includes the available tax credits that may be available, and then it kind of factors everything together, and get into a brand new car for the $300 range or what have you. It's electric. And then you're kind of limiting your exposure to the market and depreciation, some of those other factors. And so I think it does definitely make sense for a lot of folks to look at that lease option. I, for me, I was trying to limit my entry point, I guess,
for
financially,
sure.
and knew that knew that I'm going to put a lot of miles on. I think one of the other questions I've asked a lot of people, like, how many miles can I expect to get out of this car? And like, what do you mean? And I said, well, it used to be, kind of traditional gas vehicle. If you had 100,000 miles on it, that was quite a few miles. And I said, the newer gas vehicles, it seems like, 150, maybe even 200 miles or 200,000 miles would be a lot of miles. But I said, what about the electric? How is that? And the number I've been told is 300,000. And so I'm kind of determined to see how many, if I can get 300,000 miles on this car. I mean, I'm nowhere close to that yet, but just thinking about what is the durability and the life expectancy of the car. Initially, I was concerned about the battery life, and I'm honestly really not concerned about that now. I figure I'm a year into it. I relatively no degrading in the batteries on my car. I still get the same range and mileage that is when I bought it a year ago, and I put several miles on it. And so it's going to be interesting to see, the studies I've seen show where the initial degraded batteries, kind of that first initial period is
Yeah.
follows the line, and then it flattens out, thinking that the battery's going to last a lot longer. But I know I get a lot of questions on that from
No,
my
and I
buddies and
think that
stuff.
is actually kind of one of the another underappreciated thing about especially buying a used electric vehicle is if you get used to driving that, especially in your case. I mean, it's not just Teslas, but a lot of them do have kind of extended powertrain specifically warranties that make buying a used one for especially a new EV driver feel pretty comfortable about that exact question. But you're totally right. It's usually if you get like a vehicle, especially if it's got like 30 or let alone 50,000 miles on it, pretty much all of the majority of the degradation usually has already been done. And so if you can live within whatever that range is, when you get that used vehicle, you really should be able to expect kind of a similar thing for out. I mean, yeah, I mean, I know of a couple of people personally that have already hit over 200,000 in their Model 3s. And so it just seems like the likelihood of being able to keep that experience and enjoying that going is pretty likely. And Steve, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, the one of the nice things about the EV Math site, I mean, it has all these anecdotes about these rural folks and how much they like their EVs. It has a really comprehensive FAQ. It has a really intuitive calculator, but then it also links to um, a number of different sort of shopping sites. And one of those is a site that is focused entirely on used vehicles. It's called findmyelectric.com. And, these are like private party sales, but they also list used vehicles at, uh, at dealerships. So it's really a nice way to get a really broad cross section of what used vehicles are available in your area. I think we're gonna because something like 70 or 80% of car sales in the United States are actually used vehicles, and what we're trying to do is make it really easy for folks who might not have $60,000 to buy a new EV to get into a used one like Robert did.
Well,
So
and I think that's a great call out because two things to follow up on that. Obviously, Robert, you were able to use the federal tax credit, and I think the used one's also going away in the next couple of months. But um, I mean, that was a year ago. I mean, in the past year, it's been wild to me to see how. I mean, you're talking about a new vehicle, Steve, at 60. I mean, you can buy even new EVs now pretty easily in the 30s, let alone the used market's really expanded. I mean, just the other day, this is definitely not to me, it was like a tempting vehicle to get because of the range. Because you can get a like 2-year-old Mercedes EQS, like what was a six-figure vehicle for like 30 grand now. Now, obviously, when something goes wrong with that, that is going to be probably 30 grand. But it's just wild that there are some pretty good deals on the used car market, and it's been interesting to see. So I think there's a lot to be optimistic about, even with some of those things going away. You're already seeing just more cost competitive vehicles on both the new and kind of used car market for electric vehicles. I think with that, I just want to say, Steve and Robert, thank you both so much. I know we're kind of coming up at the end of our time here. Is there anything else, yeah, either of you guys want to add to today's conversation before we get going here?
Well, I just, just want to say we're getting ready to release this EV Math program and website, and so I would encourage folks, go take a look. And these are, really we're trying to focus on the economics for folks, and with a focus in the rural areas and everything. So go check that website out, EV Math, and look at some of the case studies on there, and it's from folks throughout the state of Oregon that live in rural areas that are part of this project. There's this calculator on there too, so encourage you to go plug your numbers in and kind of find out. You can put your electric rate, how much you pay for fuel, and mileage, and those, and kind of generate you a quick a quick back of the napkin calculation on see if it makes sense for you or not. So, and then chat with folks that have an EV. Most of us, some of the most interesting conversations I have are at the charging stations, and I mean all kinds of people there and everything. So yeah, I just don't be afraid to explore it. I think it's my biggest thing, because I was a little reluctant myself initially, and really happy I did pursue it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point to end it on, because I think I'm always consistently surprised by how many people think an EV won't work for them. And I think the two best things you can do are exactly that: talk to people who have them, and then two, just kind of get butts in seats.
Yeah.
And right now, especially with a lot of different EV manufacturers, not only can you do a test drive, you can sometimes do like a 48-hour or like weekend test drive to really see how it fits into your life. So I
Hmm.
think uh, the first stop should be EV Math to kind of get some of those FAQs and kind of see the cost effective of how this works in. But we'll be sure to have today's the links in today's show notes to access that. And I think from there, it's a great launching point to see how you can not only make an EV work in your life, but how easy and effective and cost efficient it is to get one in your life. So with that, Steve and Robert, thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah. Thanks for
Thank you,
having us.
Chase.